It had been one of those days that dragged on longer than it should have. After failing a math test, I was forced to stay behind at school for extra lessons until 8 o'clock. By the time I got home, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. My parents were away on a short vacation, leaving me alone in our quiet house. The silence felt both comforting and eerie as I trudged upstairs to brush my teeth before bed. The bathroom mirror caught my reflection, a circular piece of glass with intricate designs etched into its surface. It was beautiful, but also unsettling tonight. Mom had bought it years ago at an auction for $100, and ever since then, it has hung there silently watching over us. As a child, she'd warned me about an old Chinese superstition: never sleep facing a mirror, or your soul will be trapped inside it. Back then, part of me dismissed it as nonsense, while another part clung to her words like gospel truth. That's why there were no mirrors in my bedroom, just to be safe. I bent down to rinse my mouth, water swirling around the sink. When I straightened up and looked back into the mirror, my heart stopped. What stared back at me wasn't my own face. Instead, I saw a girl with enormous white eyes, devoid of pupils, staring blankly ahead. Her long black hair framed her pale face, and her lips were unnaturally red, as if painted with fresh blood. Crimson droplets trickled from the corners of her mouth, staining her pristine white dress. She looked sad, almost mournful, yet something sinister lurked beneath her sorrowful gaze. Before I could process what I was seeing, I felt myself drawn to her. A strange compulsion made me want to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew this wasn't right. Then, the lights flickered, and went out completely. The sudden darkness snapped me out of my trance. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, only to realize I couldn't move. My body froze in place, paralyzed by fear. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. All I could do was watch helplessly as the girl in the mirror began moving closer, inch by agonizing inch. Her voice slithered through the air, high-pitched and chilling, like the hiss of a snake. "Help me," she whispered, her words stretching unnaturally. "I need to escape. Out of this mirror." My mind raced. Was this real? Was I dreaming? Or was this some twisted nightmare come to life? She leaned even closer, her face now mere inches from mine within the glass. Her hollow eyes bore into mine, pleading and menacing all at once. "Sleep fasting this mirror tonight," she hissed. "And you will not suffer." In an instant, she vanished. Staring back at me now was my own reflection, but it was far from normal. My wide, terrified eyes darted across the mirror, taking in the sweat dripping down my forehead, the tremble in my hands. Slowly, control returned to my limbs. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself, and bolted out of the bathroom without looking back. There was no way I was sleeping anywhere near that mirror tonight. I crashed onto the couch downstairs, too shaken to even think about going back upstairs. Adrenaline kept me awake for hours, replaying the events in my head. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke up to bright fluorescent lights and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Confused, I blinked against the glare, trying to piece together where I was. Bandages covered most of my body, some wrapping tightly around my arms and legs, others covering parts of my face. A nurse appeared beside me, smiling warmly. "Oh good, you're awake," she said cheerfully. "What happened?" I croaked, my voice raspy and weak. "You were lucky," she explained. "Part of your house caught fire last night. Firefighters arrived just in time to pull you out. Your parents are already booking flights back, they'll probably arrive soon." My stomach churned. Fire? How did that happen? And why couldn't I remember anything after falling asleep on the couch? "The weirdest thing," the nurse continued, "is that almost everything in that part of the house burned down. Everything except, well, that mirror in your bathroom. Somehow, it survived completely unscathed. Not a scratch on it. Your parents said they'd been meaning to get rid of it because they thought it brought bad luck, but they kept forgetting. Now, after last night, they're convinced it's cursed. They've decided to sell it to someone who collects antique mirrors. My blood ran cold. The nurse chuckled nervously. Crazy, huh? Anyway, how are you feeling? Need anything? I shook my head, unable to speak. As she walked away, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words in my mind. The mirror, the girl, the fire. None of it added up, but somehow, it all connected. Whatever force resided in that mirror, I didn't want any part of it. And neither did my parents. But as I drifted off to sleep later that evening, I couldn't shake the lingering thought, what if the mirror found its way back to me someday? Moral of the story, never sleep facing a mirror, or risk inviting something far darker into your world. My father wasn't a man of fame, but he should have been. He was the first to break ground on an archaeological dig in Egypt, a dig no one ever heard about. Now, I visit him once a week. I sit by his side and tell him how things are at home while he rocks back and forth in his beige sleeveless jacket, silent as stone. The doctors pump him full of drugs that leave him drooling and vacant, but there's something haunting about the way his eyes still follow me when I speak. He hasn't said a word since the day they strapped him into that straitjacket, not after what happened. Before the drugs took hold, before he became this broken shell of a man, he looked at me with those sad, brown eyes and spoke for the last time. His voice was hoarse, barely audible, but it cut through me like a knife. Top drawer, right side. That was all he said. Then he closed his eyes and retreated into himself, leaving me alone with questions I didn't know how to answer. Why had he destroyed our house? Why had he screamed at nothing, accusing invisible forces of hiding from him? And why had he thrown my mother down the stairs, leaving her paralyzed from the neck down? I left the hospital that day with his words ringing in my ears. I drove home faster than I should have, anger boiling beneath my skin. When I arrived, I stormed upstairs to his study. The door was locked, as always, but rage gave me strength. 3 kicks later, the wood splintered, and I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of dust and old books. I strode to the desk and yanked open the top drawer on the right side. Inside lay a single manila folder, worn and frayed at the edges. My hands trembled as I opened it and spilled its contents onto the desk. A stack of crumpled papers and a small post-it note fluttered out. I picked up the note first. Written in my father's shaky handwriting were 3 numbers, 45-34-21. Setting the note aside, I turned to the papers. They were journal entries, written in my father's choppy, informal style, the same tone he used whenever he tried to explain things to me growing up. I sat down and began reading. Just got home today. I thought I'd start keeping a journal after a friend suggested it. Not really sure how to do this. Anyway, I brought back a little gift for Josh, it's his birthday soon. It's a small copper plate, about 3 inches square. Found it just outside the dig site. Has some weird carvings on it, doesn't look like any language I've seen before. There's also a picture etched into it, a human figure wearing what looks like a mask or helmet. Maybe he can put it on a chain or something. I paused, frowning. My birthday was days away, and I hadn't heard anything about this gift. I flipped to the next entry. Long night. Couldn't sleep. Swear I heard whispering coming from down the hall. Sounded like someone saying my name over and over. I checked on Josh, he was asleep. Weird. Probably just tired. This caught my attention. I remembered him asking me if I'd been awake late that night. But I had been asleep. Uneasy, I moved to the next page. Had to write this down. No one will believe me otherwise. The whispering came back last night. This time I could hear it clearly, "Give it back." Over and over again. Looked out into the hallway and saw something. A short figure, hunched over. Heard raspy breathing. Kept repeating, "Give it back." I tried to get closer, but it disappeared. Starting to think I'm losing my mind. My stomach tightened. These entries lined up perfectly with the strange behavior Dad exhibited before everything went wrong. I flipped to the next page, noticing immediately how different the handwriting was, scratchy, frantic, almost illegible. Got Buddy to translate the writing on the copper plate. Said it was Latin. Why would we find Latin in Egypt? He translated it as larva umbra at the top and veniet everywhere else. Asked him what it meant. He said, "Mask shadow. He will come." Wouldn't say more. Going to research it tonight. That was the final entry. My heart pounded as I stared at the date. It was written the day before Dad lost his mind. I gathered the papers and shoved them back into the envelope, then froze. The sticky note with the numbers was still sitting on the desk. Inspiration struck like lightning. I remembered Dad kept a combination safe in the basement. Grabbing the note, I bolted downstairs. The safe was tucked away in a corner, hidden behind boxes of old tools. My hands shook as I dialed in the numbers, 45-34-21. The lock clicked, and I swung the heavy door open. Inside, resting on a folded handkerchief, was a small piece of copper. It gleamed dully in the dim light, its surface covered in intricate carvings. At the center was the image of a humanoid figure wearing a grotesque mask. My fingers tingled as I reached for it, brushing against the cold metal. The moment I touched it, the air around me seemed to freeze. The lights flickered, casting the basement in shadowy flashes. A low whisper filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. The voice was guttural, angry, and demanding, "Give it back." The sound reverberated through the walls, rattling the windows and shaking the furniture. Beneath the cacophony, I heard a rhythmic tapping, sharp, deliberate. Against my better judgment, I forced myself to look toward the source. At the end of the hallway stood a figure. Short, hunched over, cloaked in darkness. Its skeletal arm extended outward, greenish-gray flesh peeling away to reveal bone. At the end of the limb was a monstrous hand tipped with razor-sharp claws. It tapped the wall methodically, as though counting down to something. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. In the blackness, I heard shallow, raspy breathing drawing nearer. When the lights returned, the figure loomed over me, its hood obscuring its face. The stench hit me next, a rotting, nauseating odor that burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the wall. The creature tilted its head curiously, studying me. Slowly, its arms emerged from beneath its cloak, reaching upward to pull back the hood. What I saw made bile rise in my throat. A massive copper mask covered its face, bolted and welded onto its skull. 2 holes served as eye sockets, revealing milky white orbs oozing pus-like liquid. The mask itself was crude, jagged, and unnatural, as if it had been forged in hellfire. Behind it, the creature's body twisted unnaturally, its emaciated frame stretching impossibly tall. The booming voice returned, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Flames erupted around us, consuming the basement in seconds. Smoke choked the air as I bolted for the exit, the creature's laughter echoing behind me. I burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. As I stumbled away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing was watching me. Watching, and waiting. Now, I wonder, did it reclaim what it came for? Or is it still out there, biding its time? Whatever the case, I'll never forget the lesson I learned that night. Don't take off the mask. Ask. Explain. While honeymooning in the quaint coastal town of Boothbay, Maine, my wife and I found ourselves caught in an unexpected downpour. The weather had been unpredictable all week, but this particular day was especially dreary. Gray skies stretched endlessly above us, and rain lashed against the cobblestone streets with relentless fury. Our plans for a romantic picnic by the harbor were dashed, leaving us to seek refuge indoors. We stumbled upon a small, weathered antique shop tucked away near the docks. Its faded sign creaked softly in the wind, reading "Treasures from the Deep" in peeling gold letters. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old leather, mingling with the faint aroma of salt carried in from the nearby sea. My wife wandered toward the front of the store, inspecting large wooden chests and ornate side tables, while I gravitated toward the glass display cases at the back. As a collector of optics and mariner's instruments, I couldn't resist examining the treasures within. Among the compasses, sextants, and brass spyglasses lay something peculiar, a heavy flashlight-like device crafted entirely of brass. It bore a worn brown patina that spoke of years spent beneath the ocean waves or locked away in some forgotten sailor's chest. Its design was surprisingly modern, yet unmistakably handmade, with intricate engravings etched into its surface. Faint traces of lettering suggested it might be German or Austrian in origin, though time had blurred much of the detail. Intrigued, I called over the shopkeeper, an elderly man with sunken eyes and hands gnarled like driftwood. He shuffled over slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. "Ah, you've got an eye for curiosities," he rasped when I pointed out the object. "Found it in the same chest as those compasses and the sextant over there." He gestured vaguely to another corner of the counter. $5 if you want it. Or take it for free, I don't care anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "Free? Why so eager to part with it?" He sighed deeply, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the chill in the room. "Because nobody keeps it for long," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "Go ahead, see for yourself." Reaching into the cabinet, he retrieved the strange artifact and handed it to me. It felt heavier than expected, solid and unyielding in my grasp. Twisting the bulb housing, I activated the device. A weak red beam shot forth, illuminating a dark corner of the shop. But what appeared in the beam wasn't ordinary light, it was a swirling vortex of shapes and patterns, twisting and writhing like living things. Monochrome tendrils coiled together, forming grotesque faces, clawed hands, and serpentine forms that seemed to writhe just beyond the edge of comprehension. Each movement sent shivers down my spine, even as my rational mind tried to dismiss them as mere tricks of the light. Turning off the device, I turned to the shopkeeper with excitement. "This is incredible. Some kind of oil filter must be embedded in the lens, it creates these fantastic projections. I own 2 Victorian kaleidoscopes, but none are illuminated like this." The shopkeeper didn't share my enthusiasm. His expression darkened further, and he leaned closer, gripping the edge of the counter with trembling fingers. "You don't understand, do you?" he whispered hoarsely. "It's not a trick. None of it is. Everyone who takes it thinks it's harmless, till they start seeing it when the light's off." His words chilled me more than I cared to admit. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "That ain't no projection, mister," he said, his voice barely audible now. "That light, it ain't making anything up. It's letting your eyes see what's already there." Later that evening, we returned to our cozy inn overlooking the harbor. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a thick fog that clung to the water like a ghostly shroud. Despite the unsettling encounter at the shop, I couldn't resist experimenting with my newfound treasure. Sitting alone in the dimly lit sitting area of our suite, I twisted the bulb housing once more and aimed the beam at the wall. The swirling patterns reappeared, more vivid than before. This time, however, the images seemed sharper, almost tangible. Faces contorted in agony, skeletal figures reaching out with elongated arms, and serpentine creatures slithering through the void filled the room. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, but the longer I stared, the harder it became to look away. There was something hypnotic about the chaos unfolding before me. When I finally turned off the device, the room plunged into darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then I noticed it, a faint glow lingering on the wall where the beam had been focused. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eye, a residual image burned into my retinas. But as the seconds ticked by, the glow grew brighter, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. Shapes began to emerge again, this time without the aid of the kaleidoscope. They moved sluggishly at first, then faster, until the entire wall came alive with writhing silhouettes. Panic surged through me. I scrambled backward, knocking over a chair in my haste. The glowing forms spilled off the wall, spilling onto the floor like liquid shadows. Their movements were erratic, jerky, as though struggling to break free from some unseen barrier. One of them, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes and jagged teeth, reached toward me, its claws scraping audibly against the hardwood. I lunged for the lamp beside me, flooding the room with light. The apparitions vanished instantly, leaving only silence in their wake. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat frozen, clutching the kaleidoscope tightly in my hand. Had I imagined it? Was it some sort of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But deep down, I knew better. The shopkeeper's warning echoed in my mind, they all come back to return it after a while. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that the incident was a fluke, a product of fatigue and overactive imagination. Yet every night, the visions returned, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming. Shadows danced across the walls even when no light source was present. Whispers echoed in empty rooms, too faint to make out but undeniably real. And always, the kaleidoscope sat nearby, its dull brass surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. By the end of our honeymoon, I could no longer deny the truth, the device was cursed. Whatever it revealed wasn't merely a reflection of my fears, it was a window into something far darker, a realm that existed parallel to ours, waiting patiently for an opportunity to cross over. On our final morning in Boothbay, I returned to the antique shop. The shopkeeper greeted me with a knowing smile, his weary demeanor replaced by quiet satisfaction. Without a word, I placed the kaleidoscope back on the counter. "You'll be fine now," he said softly. "Just remember, one man's curiosity can open doors best left closed." As I walked away, I glanced back at the shop one last time. Through the dusty window, I saw the kaleidoscope resting exactly where I'd left it, its red beam flickering faintly in the gloom. And somewhere deep inside, I wondered how many others had stood where I did now, desperate to rid themselves of the horrors they'd unleashed. From that day forward, I avoided antiques altogether. But late at night, when sleep eluded me, I would swear I could still hear the whispers, the same ones I dismissed as mere tricks of the mind. They lingered in the corners of my consciousness, reminding me that some secrets are better left buried.